Some criminals fall into crime because of their circumstances. Born into poverty, abused as children, or having some sort of mental illness, these people grow up and get entangled in crimes such as assault, rape, or murder. This criminal, however, was not like most criminals. With no mental illness, childhood trauma, or factors that are usually linked with those who commit crimes, Futoshi Matsunaga was a different kind of criminal. He defrauded, tortured, and had a hand in killing at least 7 people for no reason other than he could. From an early age, he always chose the wrong path and used his intelligence, charm, and control to take advantage of vulnerable people. Using tactics including torture, electrocution, blackmail, and mind control, he was able to get what he wanted. Through gruesome schemes, his crimes were so brutal that most Japanese media outlets stopped reporting on them. The Japan Times reported that the case is without comparison in the criminal history of our country. This is the story of Futoshi Matsunaga and Junko Ogata, the infamous Japanese serial killer couple. Futoshi was born on April 28, 1961, in Kyushu, Japan. His father owned a tatami shop and he was part of a wealthy family. Tatami is the straw mat that is used as flooring in Japanese homes. Futoshi was doted upon by his mother and grandmother and he did quite well in school. He was also class president and part of the student council in school. But he also had a habit of lying or misrepresenting facts, so was never trusted by his teachers or classmates. One of his classmates in an interview mentioned, he said he won the speech contest but I don't remember that. He also pushed out the captain of the club activities because he wanted to be captain. He wasn't a team player and was quite strange. Murderpedia reported, Futoshi did well in high school where he was classmates with Junko Ogata, who would later become his wife. They were just acquaintances at the time and Futoshi ended up being transferred to an all-boys school when it was discovered he was living with and having relations with a junior high school girl. After high school, he took over his father's tatami shop but converted it to selling Japanese futons. He also married a woman when he was 19 years old and had a child. On the surface, it seemed Futoshi was a regular man with a wife, child, and successful family business. While married and running the futon business, he was also involved in various scams and crimes. He would also concoct lies to tell people such as he was a graduate of Tokyo University, the most elite in the country, or a novelist and lecturer from Kyoto University, another elite school. While being married, he was also known to have up to 10 mistresses and was even part of many marriage scams in order to extort money from women. One of these women included high school classmate Junko Ogata, who he reconnected with and invited to work for him at his futon company. On Christmas Eve 1982, while Futoshi's wife was pregnant with his child, he held a party and invited many guests including women he was sleeping with. Junko was also a guest. His wife knew of his affairs and was a victim of his physical and verbal attacks. She had wanted to run away from him but because she was expecting a child she couldn't escape. Instead, once Junko and Futoshi became closer, Futoshi would often assault both his wife and Junko at the same time. His wife would be angered and fight back but Junko always took the beatings in silence. In an incident that Futoshi's ex-wife recalls, when Futoshi was assaulting Junko, he told her to lick mayonnaise off the floor. His wife told him to stop because their child was in the room watching, but Junko bent down and licked it off the floor as she had been told. Incidents of violence increased until Futoshi's wife couldn't take it anymore and ran away with their child and went to the police and filed a report. Futoshi searched for her but was not able to locate her or his son. She filed divorce papers and the couple divorced a few months later. His ex-wife later told reporters after Futoshi was caught, "If I hadn't escaped him, my family would have been murdered like Junko's was. I feel so sorry for Junko." Futoshi's rage and attempt to control people was increasing as was his torture methods. Absolute Crime website explained, he built a soundproof room in the 3rd floor of his futon company's building where he would electrically shock employees. The futon company was also where Matsunaga engaged in fraud and blackmail, stealing 180 million yen. Employees told police they were abused if they didn't follow Futoshi's orders. Employees were encouraged to abuse or torture other employees and conduct fraud such as selling low-quality futons at extremely high prices and conduct unlawful business practices. Then in 1985, Junko moved in with Futoshi who was still married. Futoshi and Junko were on the police's radar as their business had racked up much debt, been involved in various violations, and was under investigation. They shut down their business in 1992 and were in hiding. They were also on Japan's most wanted list. Under fake names, Futoshi continued meeting women and sometimes used his wife Junko and their son who was born in 1993 to trick women into a marriage. He would tell the women who were interested in finding a marriage partner that Junko was his sister, and his son was his nephew. He would then successfully attempt to extort money. It was one of these victims of his marriage fraud that ended up leaving her husband and running away with her 3 kids to be with Futoshi. However, by March of 1994, one of her kids had died due to mysterious circumstances. The woman had also died by suicide, and Futoshi had defrauded her of almost 12 million yen or $120,000. But due to lack of evidence, Futoshi was never charged for either death. These might have been his first 2 victims. But his death count was just beginning. Junko Ogata was born on February 25, 1962, in Kurume, Japan. Her father was a farmer and well known in her town as a member of the town council. She grew up in a strict and conservative household and was known to be obedient and follow rules and guidelines strictly. She was punctual, never had any relationships with boys in her school days, and was serious about her studies and life. She studied childhood education and became a kindergarten teacher after graduating from junior college. The principal of her kindergarten told Flash News, via murderpedia.org, she was a polite young lady who enjoyed being with kids. She really tried her hardest and, until the start of 1985, was never late or called in sick. However, in 1985, Junko collapsed at school and took a week off from work. But after the week, she never returned. The school searched for her but couldn't get in contact with her and had to give her last paycheck to Junko's mother. The 2009 book on the case by Masayoshi Toyoda tells that Junko reconnected with Futoshi in 1980 when he called her up and they met. Futoshi told her he was interested in marrying her. Junko had no interest in him, and when Futoshi forcefully kissed her when he was driving her home, she pushed him away. But despite that, she agreed to meet Futoshi again. The next time they met, Futoshi took Junko to a love hotel and started their physical relationship at that point. They were dating despite Futoshi having a wife and a child. When Futoshi finally met Junko's family in 1984, he was polite and seemed like an upstanding young man to her parents. Futoshi began their relationship as a good boyfriend, but he quickly got violent and jealous. When he learned that Junko had a boyfriend in the past, he forced her to show him her diary and beat her while questioning her. He then engraved his name with a burning cigarette on her breast and forced her to get a tattoo on her thigh to prove she loved him. As the years together went by, she became weaker and hopeless. She attempted to commit suicide at her parents' home in 1985. This was at the time where she was absent from kindergarten. Futoshi, angered by her suicide attempt, threatened her and her family, took nude pictures of her that he said he would release to the public. He then forced her to leave her kindergarten job and work for him. He also made plans to slowly ruin the relationship between Junko and her family. He told Junko that her parents hated her because she tried to commit suicide. He then took Junko's mother to a love hotel and seduced her and allegedly raped her. He then told Junko that her mother doesn't care about Junko and enjoys sleeping with Futoshi, causing a split between Junko and her mother. During this time he was still with his wife and hadn't divorced yet. Once the couple was under investigation and the business was forced to close, they escaped, changed their names, and lived in Ishikawa, Japan. In 1994, the couple who had together tortured and assaulted employees until their business crashed was now bankrupt. They needed to find a new source of income. They targeted a real estate agent named Kumio, alias, and his daughter. By befriending Kumio, getting him drunk, and finding out about his criminal past, Futoshi blackmailed Kumio and forced him and his daughter to live with the couple. Both Yahoo News and Bunshun newspaper also outlined the terrible ordeal and all the gruesome details of their confinement. Kumio had scabs all over his body and was forced to eat any that fell to the floor. Because of constant electric shocks to his arms, they were completely swollen and bones were visible. They had to be wrapped in bandages. Kumio was placed in a wooden cage and repeatedly electrocuted to the point he couldn't lift his arms or legs. They were only fed once a day a bowl of rice or ramen and only given a certain time limit to finish their food. Futoshi constantly took photographs of all the torture, including pictures of Junko shocking the victims, graffiti drawn over the face of Kumio, a picture of Kumio eating in front of a kitchen timer, as well as other gruesome activities. The apartment was separated by cardboard boxes laid on the ground representing the zone where the father and daughter were allowed to walk. Most parts of the home were restricted to only the couple and their son. While Futoshi and his family sat and ate in the Japanese tatami mat rooms, the father and daughter had to sit on newspapers and eat from the floor. While Futoshi and his family slept on futons, Kumio and his daughter slept on a drain board. Then Futoshi made a wooden box that had a lid and was locked from the outside. Graduating from the box, the father and daughter pair were then made to sleep on the bathroom floor with magazines and newspapers as flooring and blankets. Telling neighbors that Kumio's daughter was their niece, she would go to school every day. The pair would not be allowed to sleep more than 3 or 4 hours a night. While the daughter was at school, Kumio would have to stand in the bathroom the entire day until his daughter returned from school. When his legs were too swollen to stand, he was beaten. The pair were only allowed to urinate in plastic bottles and had a time limit for using the toilet. They were only allowed to defecate once a day. If they defecated more or had an accident, Futoshi would pick up the stool and feed it to them. After 2 years of this torture, Kumio died on February 26, 1996, at the age of 34. Futoshi forced the daughter to write a letter that it was her fault that her father died and made her and his wife Junko dismember the body. He then told him to dispose of the body parts by throwing them into the ocean from a ferry. On the same day, Junko went into labor and gave birth to their second son. Despite being part of the torture and violence with Futoshi, Junko seemed to be feeling like she needed to escape from Futoshi and his control. Desperate for cash, Futoshi wanted Junko to get money from her mother and sister. When Junko wasn't able to get any loans, she left her kids with her mother and ran away to Oita Prefecture to work at a hostess club. When Futoshi couldn't find her, he was able to extract the information from her mother. He then concocted a plan to fake his own death. He got 3 acquaintances who knew Junko to pretend that Futoshi had committed suicide and tell her about his funeral. When Junko arrived at Futoshi's funeral, he surprised her. He punished her for her escape and brought her back to his apartment. Next, he would not only punish Junko but her family as well. After Junko returned to their home, he invited her father, mother, and sister to his condominium. He would get them drunk, talk about family relationships, suggest her parents get a divorce, talk of divorcing Junko, then ask for large sums of cash to stay married to Junko and not tell police about her crimes. He was able to get all 3 members to give him money. They would work in the day and come to his place at night. They were so sleep deprived that Junko's mother even had a car accident. But they would return each night, be made to drink and argue about their family issues. Once the 3 members of Junko's family weren't able to get more money, he started torturing them and forcing them to do things for him. Her father was forced to replace the pipes where Kumio's murder had taken place, making him liable for the destruction of evidence if he was to call the police on Futoshi. Along with the abuse, he continued a sexual relationship with Junko's mother and also started having a sexual relationship with Junko's sister. When Junko confronted him, he denied sleeping with her sister, but she knew he was lying. Despite the younger sister being married, Futoshi continued to have a relationship with her and used it to further divide Junko, her sister, and her sister's husband. Futoshi then invited Junko's sister's husband to his apartment and he became the 4th member of their family to visit nightly. Futoshi's brother-in-law used to be a police officer and wasn't a blood relative, so Futoshi needed to ensure he wouldn't interfere. He acted extremely kind towards the brother-in-law and during the drunken family discussions, was able to tell him about Junko's sister's past. She had been involved in workplace affairs, had had an abortion, and was not as pure as her husband thought. He slowly got the brother-in-law to start hating his wife and her parents and urged him to beat them. He also got Junko's sister to start divorce proceedings against her husband. He forced the brother-in-law to replace the tiles of the bathroom where Kumio died and told him he would also be caught for destroying evidence if he went to the police. Futoshi then convinced the brother-in-law to bring their 2 children to live in Futoshi's apartment as well. Soon, there were 6 members of Junko's family at Futoshi's home every day. The parents stopped going to work, the kids were absent all the time from school, and they were all going to Futoshi's apartment. They started suffering from mental and physical illnesses, took out many loans which they gave to Futoshi, and could no longer afford rent on their own homes. Once the money started drying out, it was time to start lightening the load that was in his home. At this point, Futoshi had been able to sponge 63 million yen or $630,000 from the family members. Futoshi was constantly physically and mentally torturing the family, with Junko assisting him. While electrocuting Junko's father in December 1997, he died of his injuries. Junko's family, including her niece who was 10 years old, as a group dismembered his body and dumped it in public toilets and rivers. In January of 1998, just a month after Junko's father died, Futoshi got Junko and her sister to hold down their mother. She had been going into spasms from the electric shock, so the brother-in-law strangled her using an electrical cord. They also dismembered and dispersed her remains in toilets and rivers. In February 1998, after moving to another one of the apartments he owned, he told Junko that he was going to sleep and that she should deal with her sister who had gone deaf from the repeated electric shocks. Rather than having Junko's sister suffer even more torture and electric shocks, they decided to end her life. Junko's niece held down her mother's legs, while Junko's sister's husband once again strangled his wife with the electrical cord. After killing his wife, he sobbed, "I can't believe I even had to kill my wife." Soon after, the brother-in-law became sick. He was vomiting, had diarrhea, and his body was wearing down from the constant torture and food restrictions. On April 13, 1998, the brother-in-law drank a can of beer given to him by Futoshi and some anti-drowsiness medication and died an hour later. His daughter found the body and the surviving members went about dismembering and disposing of his remains. Now Futoshi and Junko were once again the only adults in the home. They still had Kumio's daughter, their own 2 sons, and now the nephew and niece of Junko's sister. The nephew was the only member of the family who had not helped in either the murder or disposing of the bodies since he was just 5 years old. Futoshi mentioned the nephew being a loose end to Junko. The niece and Junko, feeling the nephew would suffer much more through torture, decided to end his life. With the help of Kumio's daughter, in May of 1998, the 3 females instructed the nephew to lie down on the kitchen floor. His sister told him, "I'll take you to meet Mom now," as Junko strangled her nephew to death. They together dismembered and disposed of the body of the child. Next, Futoshi focused on the niece. He shocked her many times and limited her food. Junko said that if her niece was frail, it would be easier to dismember her. Futoshi felt the niece might talk and told Kumio's daughter that if the niece was gone, there would be one less mouth to feed. In June of 1998, Futoshi talked to the niece in the bathroom and told Kumio's daughter and Junko that the niece said she wanted to die. The 2 women approached the niece as she lifted her neck, making it easier to strangle her. She was also dismembered and disposed of. After the death of 6 members of Junko's family, Futoshi was also looking for a new way to make more money, so he found a woman who he convinced to get divorced and marry him. He forced the woman to put her twin children in his care and provide child support. To make enough money to pay him, the woman ended up working at a sex shop. She gave him 25 million yen or $25,000. During the entire ordeal, Kumio's daughter, who was now a teenager, had been living with Futoshi and Junko. She was tortured, asked to torture, and was responsible for the care of Futoshi's kids as well as the twins that were now living with them. In January 2002, she finally decided it was time to make he escape, as everyone around had been killed off one by one and she felt she might be next. She ran away to her grandparents' home and told him she was on a business trip. They weren't aware of her confinement or her father's death. Unfortunately, Futoshi was still seeing many women, including Kumio's sister. Through her, he was able to find her whereabouts and came back to bring Kumio's daughter home. But before she left a note for her grandparents asking for help. Once back with Futoshi, Kumio's daughter was strangled, electrocuted, and had her fingernails pulled off using needle nose pliers. The grandparents contacted the police, and a photo was found with the daughter holding her father's heart. On March 7, 2002, Futoshi and Junko were arrested. The couple was identified. Kumio's daughter's confession started a murder investigation, and the police took custody of Futoshi's 2 sons and the twins they had acquired. The details told by the daughter were both shocking and brutal. Japanese reports said, Futoshi's hideous sexual proclivities were horrifying. He forced his common-law wife's mother to take part in a simulated rape, and he used a stun gun on the genitals of Junko's niece, who was only a little girl 10 years old, giving her an electric shock. When police entered Futoshi's home, they found loads of pornographic photos and videos that he had taken. There were even photos where he had taken pictures of naked women walking around with vibrators still inserted into themselves. On October 23, 2002, Junko finally flipped on Futoshi and confessed to all her crimes. With both Junko and Kumio's daughter's confessions, they were able to charge both Futoshi and Junko with murder. Japan Times reported that the victims were separately murdered and their bodies dismembered and disposed of. No physical evidence of the crimes was ever found. Police investigators used both Junko's testimony, Kumio's daughter's testimony, pictures, and other evidence found in the apartments, as well as statements from neighbors complaining about putrid smells which were likely from the decomposing bodies being boiled and dissected. The trial for the murderous couple began in May of 2003 at the Fukuoka District Court. The couple was charged for the murder and confinement of 7 people. Junko pleaded guilty, but Futoshi continued to plead innocent, claiming he only abused the victims because he did not like their attitude and did not intend to kill them because they were his money trees. He insisted that Ogata committed the murders on her own. The prosecutors asked for the death penalty for both Futoshi Matsunaga and Junko Ogata, for murdering 5 of Ogata's relatives, including 2 children and the escapee's 34-year-old father. On September 28, 2005, the court sentenced the couple to be executed by hanging. They were found guilty of 6 murders but not for killing Kumio, as he had been injured by electrocution, which later resulted in his death. They appealed the decision to the Fukuoka High Court, and in September of 2007, Junko's death sentence was lowered to life in prison. Reasons included the domestic violence and torture she suffered from Futoshi, because she confessed to the crimes, and she showed remorse for what she had done. Futoshi's death sentence was upheld. Futoshi appealed the decision once again, and the case was brought to the Supreme Court. His defense argued that he wasn't involved in the crimes and should not get the death penalty. However, the prosecution felt he abused, assaulted, and coerced those around him to commit crimes, so he wouldn't get his hands dirty. They also said he was not remorseful, never apologized for the crimes, and the punishment was justified. In December of 2011, the Supreme Court upheld the death sentence and his sentence was finalized. He is still currently on death row at the Fukuoka Detention Center awaiting his execution. According to his son, he became blind from diabetes and requires extra care at the facility. The twin children were returned to their mother. Futoshi and Junko's 2 boys enrolled in elementary school and lived at a child welfare institution. Kumio's daughter was sent to an orphanage, but once becoming an adult got married and lives with her husband and 2 children. In July 2003, a farewell ceremony for the 6 deceased members was held with photographs and an empty urn. Some may wonder how Futoshi was able to control so many people and keep them in his control for so long. He used a variety of tactics that weakened people and made him vulnerable to his demands. A lot of his early tactics involved getting people to drink alcohol, lower their guard, and tell him secrets that they thought they could trust him with. He would then threaten him with violence or blackmail in exchange for money. He was successfully able to divide Junko's family and have family members pitted against each other rather than against him. He abused and tortured everyone around him, even his own children, to ensure everyone was afraid of him and knew the consequences of making him angry. Futoshi controlled the movement, sleeping patterns, toilet schedule, and food intake of his victims. He would only give them certain clothes or refused them time to bathe or leave the home. He also monitored their conversations, and they weren't allowed to speak when he wasn't in the room. He blacked out or boarded up windows, added padlocks, confiscated licenses, phones, and only allowed him to carry small amounts of money. He would also regularly call him to ensure he knew exactly where they were. Though he may not have actually ended a life or disposed of a body with his own hands, he was the puppet master that made the entire incident play out as it did, and if Kumio's daughter had not escaped, he still might have continued his control on new victims. Futoshi Matsunaga will always be remembered in Japan as the serial killer who used mind control and torture to have his victims turn on each other. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and wish to see more, click the subscribe button alongside the notification bell to get notified each time we release a video. Make sure to also like the video and comment what you think about this case, or if you have one in mind that you want us to cover, let us know in the comment down below.